Colony designation Reach 7, human administered, population 4.3 million at last census. The clerk read it without looking up. His voice carried the particular flatness of someone who had read 500 such entries and found no reason to make this one different. Compliance adjustment conducted under revised threat matrix authorization. Session 7441. Casualty figure 4.3 million. He paused not for effect, not for the chamber. He was simply moving to the next line. Accord of Reach Protection Clause, procedurally suspended pending formal review. He looked up. The motion to enter this into the permanent record. All in favor. 41 hands. Cheer Osivith confirmed it from the raised dais. Gill filaments running amber gold from base to tip, the full unbroken color that meant a session proceeding exactly as planned. So entered, he said. Session 7441, Agenda Item 9 closed. The record display at the chamber's center updated. The timestamp blinked once. The entry sat beneath 600 others from this session alone, in the registry's standard typeface, in the registry's standard weight, as unremarkable as a water bill. The chamber moved on to Item 10. Nobody in the observer gallery moved. There were 12 observers present. Trade attachés, 1 junior member from the VethCorps Transparency Block, 3 accredited journalists from outlet consortiums the Assembly had approved in 2,847 of the current calendar. Kay had been in this gallery for 11 years. Her post was a clause in the Accord of Reach, 1 human observer, non-voting, present at the pleasure of the chair, and in 11 years she had attended 847 sessions. She had a seat. She had a water glass. She had never once been asked to do anything that required standing up. She stood up. The translator hum in the chamber. 400 beads running on 400 different channel configurations, all tuned a half-tone apart, the low persistent chord of the Assembly in full session thinned. Not all at once. 1 delegate switched channels to the human register. Then 3 more. Then a cluster near the back of the 3rd tier. The thinning spread the way a ripple spreads, and by the time Osivith had registered what was happening, perhaps a third of the room was already listening to Kay's frequency. She had not spoken yet. She was simply standing. Liaison high, Osivith's voice carried the professionally patient register, the patience of someone who had managed non-voting observers for 31 years and had never once been in a situation that required actual patience. This is not a speaking session. Kay said, Clause 7, Subsection 4 of the Accord of Reach, the 1 delegate floor access provision. Her voice was level. It was the voice of someone reading a menu. The provision entitles a signatory observer to invoke floor access and challenge any compliance figure entered into the permanent record during the session in which it is entered. I am invoking it. There was a beat. The chamber's translator hum had finished its migration. The room was now almost entirely on the human channel. Osivith looked at Subdirector Vrethall of the Morvani Combine, who was seated 2 chairs to his left and who, in Osivith's experience, was the most fluent parliamentary proceduralist on the floor. Vrethall's answer was a very small motion of his secondary jaw, the Morvani equivalent of a shrug. The provision existed. It was older than either of them. The premise of its existence had been that a signatory observer might one day have something to say. Nobody had thought it would be today. The floor is opened under Clause 7, Osivith said. Archivist General Kjovith is requested to attend. Stay with this. What she challenges is in the record. What the record says is about to change. Archivist General Kjovith moved from the archive desk at the chamber's eastern wall to the central floor position. Rudak, tri-jointed fingers, a researcher's stoop from decades of bending over registry displays. He set down his stylus and picked up the floor terminal. Kay waited for him to be in position. The compliance matrix for Reach 7, Kay said, lists the human fleet presence in the Reach zone at the time of Session 7441's threat matrix review as 340 whole equivalents. Kjovith confirmed it without being asked. Under the correction protocol, 340. Correct. I challenge that figure, Kay said. I'm requesting it be read from its registry source. The correction protocol was a rule the Assembly had written for itself. Any challenged compliance figure must be sourced directly from the registry and read aloud in the session where the challenge was raised. The Assembly had written this rule to protect the accuracy of its own record. It had never, in its written history, been turned around and pointed at the Assembly itself. Cuvith's tri-jointed fingers moved across the terminal display. He found the compliance matrix source file. He found the tonnage survey behind it, a classified compliance directorate survey. Its seal dated 6 years prior. The protocol required him to open it. He opened it. He ran the figure. He looked at the display. He ran it again. The chamber was very quiet. Brixanan of the Kelshan compact, seated in the 7th row of the eastern tier, a compact, ridge-backed species with the long memory that came from being small enough to have needed multilateral protection themselves. Not the quiet of people who had stopped moving, the quiet of people who had stopped breathing on purpose without knowing they were doing it. One of the trade attachés in the observer gallery had put down his stylus and was staring at the back of Ka-Hai's head. Once had been watching Ka-Hai since the moment she stood. His ridge lay flat against his collar. Not alarm, attention. He had been watching the Compliance Directorate's filing patterns for 3 years. He had filed 2 procedural queries about the Reach Zone surveys. Both had received auto-responses citing classification protocols. He had left the queries open. He had come to this session because the Reach 7 entry was on the agenda. Cuvith verified the source. Standard protocol. He looked at the display a 3rd time. The corrected figure, he said, is 11,200 unregistered hull equivalents. Brixanan seconded the floor access before Osivith could draw breath to speak. The protocol was automatic the moment a second was received. The floor remained open. The challenged figure was now formally in dispute. The correction would be entered into the record of this session. The amber in Osivith's gill filaments dimmed at the tips, just the tips. The rest still held. Sub-Director Vrethahol moved immediately. I moved to suspend Liaison High's floor access on the grounds of procedural irregularity. The challenge was filed without prior registry notification. The chamber waited for a second. 60 seconds. The motion required a verbal second within 60 seconds or it lapsed. No second came. The motion lapsed. Vrethahol's secondary jaw was very still. Osivith called for compliance fleet redeployment, emergency protocol, full directorate authority, the standard instrument for zone enforcement when a compliance entry was disputed by a signatory with floor access. The order went out to the 6 compliance fleet stations covering the Reach Zone. Station Prime Reach responded in 0.3 seconds. Jurisdiction Kari, treaty status unresolved. The other 5 stations returned the same message filed simultaneously, time-stamped 0314 that morning. The chamber had not known the stations had responded before the session opened. The chamber now knew. Ka-Hai reached into the document holder at her side and removed a data wafer. She held it up so the chamber cameras could log it. Void declaration under Article 14 of the Accord of Reach, transmitted at 2100 hours yesterday evening. The 6 stations received it before this session opened. She set the wafer on the ledge in front of her seat. Article 14 is the betrayal clause. It voids the treaty at the non-breaching party's declaration upon verified breach of the Civilian Protection Foundational condition. She paused, not for drama, not for the room. She was giving Cuvith's terminal time to log the citation. The protection clause was active. The population at Reach 7 was under it. The compliance adjustment was conducted under it. The amber was gone from the outer third of Osivith's filaments now. The inner band still held, duller, but held. Brixanan rose from his seat. He set something on it, a physical document bound in the old diplomatic style, seals intact, the physical accord of Reach. He did not ask for recognition. The floor was open, and his second had entitled him to speak. He walked to the clerk's desk at the chamber center, which was 312 years old, and which Brixanan had requested from the treaty archive 6 weeks ago and had been carrying to sessions in his document case ever since. He set it down with the seal facing upward. The protection clause, Brixanan said, in the careful, dry voice of someone who has waited 3 years to say something and has decided to say it exactly once, was not formally suspended. It was unfiled. There is a procedural difference. A suspended clause has a suspension motion in the record. This one does not. What was done to Reach 7 was done under an active protection treaty. He looked at Vrethahal. He looked at Osavith. The treaty has a word for that. It appears in Article 14. It is not a compliance adjustment. He returned to his seat. His ridge was flat. The session chime had not rung. No motion had been called. The record display still showed the agenda. Item 10, pending. Item 9, closed. The clerk's entry was still there. Population 4.3 million, compliance adjustment, protection clause, suspended pending review. It was still there, but the chamber was reading it differently now. Kiovith had not moved from the floor position. He had the classified survey open on the terminal. 11,200 hull equivalents. His fingers had stopped moving across the display. He was looking at the source file's metadata. The survey had been sealed 6 years ago. The compliance matrix had continued to report 340 for 6 years. He had run his own reports from that matrix. He had signed off on 3 compliance summaries citing the 340 figure. He had not known. That was the thing he was sitting with. He had not known because the source had been sealed and the protocol had never required him to open it. The correction protocol required him to open it now. He entered the corrected figure into the floor record. It appeared on the record display beside the original entry, not replacing it, not yet, pending the chair's confirmation. 11,200 hull equivalents. It sat there next to the 340, like an accusation in the registry's standard typeface. Osavith looked at it for a long time. His filaments were colorless at the outer half. It sat there next to the 340 like an accusation in the registry's standard typeface. Osavith looked at it for a long time. His filaments were colorless at the outer half. The clerk's hand had stopped over the confirmation field. Protocol required the chair to confirm a corrected figure before it passed from the floor record to the permanent record. The confirmation was normally automatic, a formality 3 seconds between the archivist's reading and the entry updating. Osavith had confirmed 641 figures this session without pausing. He was pausing now. The source is the Compliance Directorate survey, Kiovith said, from the floor position, not editorializing, simply providing the answer to the question Osavith had not asked aloud. Sealed date, 6 years, 4 months, 11 days prior. I have the chain of custody log on the terminal. The survey is genuine. The amber was gone from the inner band now, all of it. Confirmed, Osavith said, and the permanent record updated. Vrethahal rose immediately. His voice had acquired a different quality, not louder, more precise. The way a blade is precise rather than heavy. I move that the corrected figure be examined by the Compliance Directorate's Oversight Panel before any further floor proceedings. The survey's seal indicates a classification for operational reasons. Floor access to classified source material requires. The correction protocol has no classification exemption, Brixenon said from his seat. He did not stand. He said it, the way someone says a thing they have been waiting to say for long enough that the waiting is over. The Assembly wrote the protocol. It is in the registry. There is no classification exemption. Vrethal's motion required a second. 60 seconds. No second came. Kahai was still standing. Article 14, she said. The betrayal clause voids the treaty at the non-breaching party's declaration upon verified breach of the Civilian Protection foundational condition. Her voice had not changed register since the first word she had spoken. The corrected tonnage figure is now on the permanent record. The protection clause was active at the time of session 7441. The void declaration was transmitted 21 hours ago. It has been received and logged by all 6 compliance fleet stations. She sat down. The chamber did not move for 3 seconds. Not in the way a chamber does not move when it is waiting, in the way it does not move when it has misread what kind of session this is and has not yet finished adjusting. He had the full classified survey open now, the one that had been sealed for 6 years, that had been filed under a Compliance Directorate classification code. Osavith said, "The floor will hear from Archivist General Kiovith on the corrected survey scope." Kiovith moved his fingers across the terminal. that had continued sitting in the registry while the compliance matrix drew from the 340 figure in every report since. He began to read, not the summary. The source data, the Reach Zone survey, was commissioned as a standard capacity assessment, he said. Survey date, 6 years, 4 months, 11 days prior. Method, passive hull signature mapping, all registered and unregistered transit signatures within Zone 7 of the Reach perimeter, 30-day rolling average. He paused. At survey completion, the Compliance Directorate's assessment noted that the unregistered signatures were of human-administered origin. The assessment recommended reclassification of the tonnage figure on the compliance matrix. The recommendation was sealed rather than acted upon. The distinction between sealed and acted upon was so small that it almost disappeared into the sentence. Brix Anan heard it. 3 delegates in the second tier heard it. The Vethkor Transparency Block observer heard it. Vrethal's secondary jaw did not move. The survey records 11,200 distinct hull signatures, Kiovith continued. The classification breakdown by type, read it, Kahai said, the shortest thing she had said all session. Kiovith read it. He read the hull classification breakdown, the proportion of those 11,200 signatures that matched known military configuration profiles, and the proportion that matched no profile in the registry at all, which was the larger number. He read the transit pattern analysis. The signatures had not been clustered near the Reach Zone's edge. They had been spread across the full depth of the zone, in a pattern consistent with territorial familiarity rather than transit. He read the age of signature notation. The earliest signatures dated from 7 years prior to the survey, which meant they predated the Compliance Directorate's original capacity assessment by 3 years. The chamber listened. None of it was dramatic. Kiovith's voice was the voice of someone reading a maintenance log. The horror, and it was horror of the procedural kind, the kind that lives in the gap between what a document says and what that means, was in the flatness of the read. The survey had been here. It had been in the registry, under the seal, for 6 years. The compliance reports had cited the 340 figure 6 times in those 6 years. The Assembly had accepted 6 compliance reports on the Reach Zone and had not questioned the figure once. A junior delegate from the outer ring had put down his data tablet. He was looking at the record display. Not at Kovith, at the record display where the corrected figure now sat beside the original. 3 rows ahead of Brix Anan, a senior member of the Morvani delegation had turned slightly in her seat, not turning to face anyone, just turning, the way a person turns when they want to check that the door behind them is where they left it. The survey had a page of attached documentation. Kiovith turned to it. Attached, Compliance Directorate Internal Assessment, dated survey completion day. Quote, hull signature density inconsistent with Class He emerging profile. Recommend urgent reclassification review. The population at Reach 7, 4.3 million at last census, should be considered as a dependent population of an unregistered military entity rather than an independent civilian settlement. Kiovith stopped. He looked at the terminal. He continued. End quote. Recommendation, sealed. Reclassification, not filed. The population at Reach 7, 4.3 million at last census. The same number the clerk had read an hour ago, in the same register, in the same typeface. It meant something different now, a dependent population of an unregistered military entity, under an active protection clause, under a treaty the Assembly had authored and ratified and enforced for 312 years. One delegate in the 4th tier near the eastern wall stood up and walked toward the chamber's eastern exit. He did not file a motion to leave. He did not sign out in the attendance record. He walked, and the door opened, and he did not come back. His seat was empty. He read it aloud, not the whole article, the operative clause, breach of the civilian protection foundational condition by any signatory body where such breach causes direct mortality to a protected population. No one filed a motion about it. Brix Anan placed the physical accord on the terminal ledge beside Kovith's position. He opened it to Article 14. Constitutes a betrayal of the treaty's foundational terms and entitles the non-breaching party to void the treaty by declaration, with all attendant status consequences to the breaching party. He closed it. That is the treaty's own word, not my characterization. The treaty's word is betrayal. The session chime rang. The routine chime, scheduled, it rang every 90 minutes of session time regardless of proceedings. Nobody moved to respond to it. In 847 sessions, Kahai had watched the chime produce an automatic procedural pause, delegates shifting, checking their notes, Osavith calling the brief status check. Nobody moved. I request, Osavith said, and his voice was almost entirely level, a formal recess. No second. The motion lapsed. The accord of reach remained on the terminal ledge. On the Vethkor observation relay, the only live external feed still running, because the Vethkor transparency block had formally requested Council broadcast rights after Reach 7's entry appeared on the session agenda 3 weeks ago, and had been granted them. Its physical seal faced upward, 312 years old. The diplomatic wax intact, the color of old amber, which was not the color of Osavith's gill filaments anymore. And their observation channel was the only one the chamber had not closed during the morning procedural setup. Admiral Jareth was standing at the relay deck's forward observation console. The console was showing him the reach zone perimeter. It had been showing him the reach zone perimeter for the past 40 minutes, because that was the feed he had put up when the void declaration timestamp appeared in the morning's pre-session reports. He had not told anyone on his relay crew why he was watching that particular feed. He had simply watched it. The formation materialized at 0942 session time, not transiting, not approaching. Materializing the way a very large number of things that have been running dark in a very large volume of space materialize when they stop running dark, 11,200 distinct hull signatures. Jareth knew that number because he had just been watching the assembly's floor feed when Kovith read it. He looked at his console. His console was showing him 11,200 hull signatures at the reach zone perimeter. Dark holding. His targeting analyst said, from the station to his left, Admiral. Targeting solutions are returning unresolved across all channels. I can see that, Jareth said. All channels, sir. We have no solution on any hull in the formation. I understand. His jaw had locked. Not a decision reflex. The triple-hinged locking reflex of his species under hard stimulus. The kind of thing that happened before the mind caught up. The formation was not firing. It was not maneuvering. It was simply there, at the perimeter, holding position with the particular stillness of things that have decided they do not need to move. Every one of Jareth's targeting solutions said UN resolved. The formation was not jamming them. It was not running any active countermeasures his systems could detect. The targeting solutions were unresolved because the formation's configuration did not match any engagement profile in the Vethkor tactical library, and the tactical library could not assign a solution to something it could not categorize. Kahai's voice came on all council feeds simultaneously. She had not asked for the channel. The channel had been opened by the Void Declaration's transmission protocol. Article 14 included a compulsory communications provision, which gave the declaring party broadcast access to all treaty registry subscribers for a period of 40 minutes following declaration. The Assembly had written this provision to ensure non-breaching parties could communicate their status to the registry. The Assembly had never been the subject of it before. Reach 7's population is on record, Kahai said. The Accord Clause is on record. The tonnage figure is now on record. A pause. Kovith's terminal in the chamber logged the citation automatically. We are also on record. You have 40 minutes. Another pause, not for effect. She was giving the chamber time to understand the next sentence. That is the length of a standard session recess. Use it. Jareth's jaw was still locked. He looked at the formation on his console. He looked at the UN resolved solutions on every channel. He looked at the assembly chamber feed, where the session chime had rung 40 seconds ago and nobody had responded. His tactical analyst had stopped typing. His communications officer had turned slightly in his chair, not toward anyone, just turned. Jareth said, "Log the transmission, all of it, time-stamped." "Sir, what do we?" "Log it," Jareth said. "Then we wait." Back in the chamber, Osavith called for a recess a second time. No second came. No second came. Jareth had been watching the chamber feed for 11 minutes. He had watched Osavith call for a recess the first time. He had watched the 60 seconds pass with the particular quality of silence that belongs to things that are failing publicly. He had watched the second call. He had watched 60 more seconds. He turned back to the reach zone perimeter feed. The formation was exactly where it had been. 11,200 hull signatures, holding UN resolved across every channel. "Sir," his targeting analyst said, "the formation has not moved." "I know," Jareth said. "It has not maneuvered, not adjusted alignment, not. I know what it has not done," Jareth said. His jaw was still locked. He made himself speak anyway. "It is waiting on the chamber feed behind him. Nobody had filed a motion in 4 minutes. The clock in the corner of the feed read 40-minute Wendone, 34:17 remaining. In the chamber itself, that same clock was visible on the record display, running in the corner, the way all compulsory communications windows were logged. The timestamp, the protocol provision, the countdown. Every delegate in the room could see it. The clerk, who had been at his desk for the entirety of the session, who had entered 641 items without incident. 34 minutes, 17 seconds. Now 16. Now 15. Osavith's gill filaments were the color of the walls. Who had 3 times this week changed the water glasses at the human delegations table as a matter of routine, and had done it again at the 90-minute mark before the chime, before anyone stood up. The clerk picked up the carafe and changed Kahai's water again. He set the carafe down on its ring mark. He picked up his stylus. He looked at the record display. He put the stylus down. Kahai stood. The chamber did not move. The translator hum had settled at a single frequency, the human channel, 400 beads, all tuned the same, which was something that had never happened in a regular session in the Assembly's 300 years of recorded proceedings. The hum was very even, very clean. It had the quality of a room holding its breath in unison. "We could have come through in the first week," Kahai said. "We chose to file the complaint first. That was all. No motion from the chair, no count from the clerk, no sound at all from 400 delegates." It stayed where he had set it, beside the record display on the ring mark left by the carafe, and the cursor on the permanent record blinked twice, 3 times in the silence, waiting for an entry that was not coming, because the clerk's hand was not on the terminal. The clerk's stylus did not move, because the clerk had stopped. Osavith read the line from the record display. He had not asked to read it. His eyes moved there the way eyes move when a room becomes very quiet and there's only one thing to look at. The permanent record still carried the Reach 7 entry, compliance adjustment conducted under revised threat matrix authorization, session 7441. Casualty figure 4.3 million. He read it to himself, then he read it again. His filaments did not move. They were past the point where movement was information. They had settled into the particular stillness of something that has finished deciding. Vrethal was looking at the window counter. 40-minute window, 21:44 remaining. Brixanan was looking at the accord of reach on the terminal ledge. His ridge was flat. He had been still for 6 minutes. He was thinking about the registry audit, the motion he had drafted 3 weeks ago and not yet filed, because he had not been certain he had enough procedural standing to call it. He was now certain. He was waiting for the right moment. He did not look at Vrethal. On the Vithkor deck, the formation held. Jareth's communications officer had been watching the channel traffic logs for the past 20 minutes. He said quietly, "Admiral, the Vithkor stations, the 3 in the outer ring, not ours, they are querying the formation." He thought about what a species that had been sitting in a zone under a protection clause for 11 years, that had been filing compliance reports and attending sessions and changing its observer's water glass every 90 minutes for 847 sessions. Direct signal response? None. The formation is not acknowledging queries from non-council sources. Jareth looked at the unresolved solutions. He looked at the formation on the perimeter feed. Would say to a non-council signal from a block that had formally requested transparency rights after watching the compliance entry go into the permanent record. "Log it," he said. "No response required from us." His targeting analyst had stopped trying to run solutions. There was nothing to solve for. The formation was not configured in a way his library could categorize, and the library had 72 years of tactical data in it, and it could not categorize this. He had run the scan 4 times. He had gotten unresolved 4 times. He had stopped running it. Back in the chamber, 20-minute window, 1803 remaining, Vrethall rose. His voice had the quality of someone reading aloud from a document they did not write. "I move to suspend the 40-minute communications window on grounds of..." "The window is a treaty provision," Kahai said. She was still standing. "Article 14, subsection 3. It cannot be suspended by assembly motion. It was written that way." She paused. "The assembly wrote it that way." Vrethall sat down. 3 minutes passed. The chamber did not move. Brixanan said without rising, "Subdirector Vrethall, there is only one motion available to you." His voice was not unkind. It was precise. The kind of precision that comes from knowing exactly where the exits are. You know which one it is. Vrethall knew. The chamber knew. The record display was still showing species H1 Class C emerging, beside the corrected tonnage figure, beside the running window counter. The only available refiling that the record could process without the permanent entry reading the Assembly had authorized a war crime under an active treaty was to reclassify humanity as something other than a protected civilian population signatory, which was to say, the record could not hold all 3 of those entries in permanent registry simultaneously and remain internally consistent. The corrected figure, the protection clause, the compliance adjustment, and the current classification. Something had to be refiled to acknowledge that the Compliance Directorate's 6-year-old assessment had been correct. 40-minute window 0203 remaining, not at the deadline, at 2 minutes before. The chamber did not wait for the clock. Vrethall said, "I move to reclassify species H-1 as a non-signatory sovereign military entity, with full status consequences as defined in the registry's treaty void protocol." He said it the way someone reads the only sentence on a page they cannot not read. "I further move that the Reach 7 compliance entry be amended to reflect the corrected tonnage figure and the void declaration's timestamp, and that the war justification assessment be entered as verified." The second came from Osivith, his own second verbal. Within 3 seconds of the motion, he had nothing else to do with the remaining 2 minutes. The vote was called, 47 in favor, 5 against Brixanan, and 4 members of the Outer Ring Compact delegations who had been watching the Accord on the terminal ledge for the past 40 minutes. Brixanan's ridge was flat. He voted no. He did not explain the vote. He was noted. He was on the record as the dissenting counselor who had placed the physical Accord on the clerk's desk and named what happened to Reach 7 by the treaty's own word. He would not say he had been right. He did not need to. The window counter reached 0. The 40-minute window closed. On the Vethkor deck, Sharith watched the formation on the perimeter feed. It had not moved. It had not fired. At the moment the window counter reached 0, the formation began to move, not toward the Council systems, not toward anything the tactical library could have categorized as an attack vector. By formation, slowly. Each section of the 11,200 hulls beginning to stand down in sequence. A long and careful unwinding. One ship held. Jareth watched it. It was at the edge of the formation, the last to begin moving, and when it moved, it did not move with the others. It moved on a heading his navigation officer identified after a moment as Reach 7's coordinates. "What is it doing?" The navigation officer said. Jareth did not answer. He had watched the clerk change the water glass. He had watched Kahai stand up. He had watched 400 beads switch to a single channel. He had a reasonable sense of what a species that had filed the complaint before it moved, the fleet was going to do at the coordinates of the population that the complaint had been about. "Sir," the navigation officer said. "Log the heading," Jareth said. "All of it." The vote was 47 to 5. The clerk had the reclassification motion confirmed and was moving to the terminal. His stylus was in his hand. In the chamber behind Kahai's position, the record display still showed species H1, class key emerging. In 40 seconds, it would not. Brixanon picked up his data table. He opened the registry audit motion, 3 pages, drafted 3 weeks ago, updated 6 days ago, updated again this morning before the session opened. He read the final paragraph. He made one change. He filed it. What the audit would find, how many other surveys had been sealed rather than acted upon, how many other protection clauses had been unfiled rather than suspended. The timestamp on the motion was entered before the session's formal close. It was in the record. How many other compliance matrices had drawn from figures that the Compliance Directorate had corrected in private and left unchanged in public was an open question. It was Brixanon's question. He had put it in the record, and it was there now, in the same permanent record that held everything else, waiting for the Archivist General's office to answer it. He set the tablet down. The record display was beginning to update. The clerk's fingers moved across the terminal with the particular care of someone who understood that the permanence of what he was typing was not a metaphor. The permanent record was permanent. It had been permanent for 312 years. The record display was beginning to update. Everything entered into it remained entered, available to any signatory, any accredited observer, any registry request filed in perpetuity. He was not drafting, he was not preparing a motion. He was typing the final form, and the display was live, and 400 delegates and the VethCorps observation feed were watching him do it. The old entry was still visible in the upper portion of the display as he began. Species H1, Class C emerging. It had been there for 11 years. It had been there for all 847 sessions Kahai had attended without standing up. It was there now, while he typed beneath it. Kahai watched the display. She did not look at Asavith. She did not look at Vrethel. She looked at the display the way someone looks at a thing they have been waiting for long enough that the waiting has become the shape of their days, and the thing arriving does not produce relief so much as a settling, the frame going still. The formation was standing down in sections, not all at once, not in a way that felt like retreat. It was the standing down of something that had been waiting for a specific procedural outcome and had received it. From the VethCorps deck, Jareth watched his observation channel and was now doing what it had always been going to do once that outcome was confirmed. His navigation officer had tracked the single outlier ship to its heading, reached 7's coordinates, building speed, not weapons alignment. Admiral, the communications officer said, the human formations broadcast channel is still active. The 40-minute window has closed. They are holding the channel open. Jareth looked at the channel log, an open channel from a formation of 11,200 ships that had just watched the assembly reclassify them without firing once. He had watched the formation materialize. He had watched Kahai change 400 translator beads to a single frequency. He had watched Asavith read a compliance entry twice and find nothing to do with his hands. He had been formally watching council proceedings for 19 years, and this was the first session he had watched in which the assembly had been walked, clause by clause, through its own protocol to the only exit it had left. He straightened. Open a return channel, he said. Priority treaty register. VethCorps compact formal. His communications officer looked at him. Sir, we are not. We requested transparency rights, Jareth said. We watched. We have the record. Open the channel. The channel opened. Jareth spoke in the formal treaty register of the VethCorps Compact, the same register used for ratification sessions and first contact protocols. The register that meant, this is binding, this is for the record. We would speak with you, he said, about terms. Our own the channel held for 4 seconds. Kahai said, send us the draft. We will read it. That was all in the chamber. The clerk's fingers had not stopped moving. The entry was nearly complete. Asavith watched it. Vrethel was looking at the table in front of him, the surface of it, specifically the way a person looks at a surface when they are done with looking at anything that has meaning. Brixanon's audit motion was in the registry. It had been time-stamped. The Archivist General's office would receive it at session close and would be required, under the correction protocol, to begin processing it within 30 days. How many other surveys existed under compliance directorate seals? How many other matrices drew from corrected figures that had been sealed rather than acted upon? Those were now registry questions. Bricks Anna had made them registry questions. He was sitting with his hands flat on the table in front of him, his ridge flat, and he was not looking at anyone. He had done what he came to do. The clerk finished. He read the new entry aloud into the session record, as the protocol required when a classification was amended on the permanent record. His voice had the same register it had used for 641 other entries today. The protocol did not ask for a different register. The permanents did not require a different register. The words did. Species H1? He read the old classification first, as protocol required, so the record showed what was changed and what it changed from. Class C emerging. He paused. One breath. Reclassified, non-signatory, sovereign military entity. Treaty registry status. Voided at human declaration. Betrayal clause invoked. War justification. Verified. Colony reached 7. Population 4.3 million. Closed. The session chime rang. Not the 90-minute chime, the session close chime, the one that had rung at the end of every session in the Assembly's recorded history. It rang because the session had run to its scheduled end. The Chamber's business was not finished in the sense that there was more on the agenda, but the record had been updated, and the window had closed, and the audit had been filed, and the vote was entered. It rang the way it always rang, the same chime, the same pitch, the same 2 beats. And the session chime rang because sessions ended at their scheduled time regardless of what had happened in them. Nobody moved. Kahai looked at the chamber, the display behind Osivus' dais, the accord of reach on the terminal ledge, the record display, now carrying the new entry above the old one, both visible, one struck through in the clerk's notation and one in the standard registry typeface. She had been the human compliance liaison for 11 years. The accord of reach had included it because the Assembly had included a compliance observer clause in every multilateral treaty it authored, and humanity had been offered the clause, and someone in the compliance office had sent Kahai, and she had shown up. The role had been a formality, and for 11 years nobody had asked her to do anything that required standing up. She had filed the complaint at 2100 hours the previous evening. The fleet had moved at 2101. The fleet is standing down, she said, to the chamber, to the record, which was live and public-facing and would carry this the way it carried everything. All ships are standing down. One ship is already at Reach 7's coordinates. She paused. It is building something. We thought, given the entry, that there should be something there. She picked up the data wafer from the ledge where she had set it. She did not file it. She put it in her document holder. We could have come through in the first week, she said. We chose to file the complaint first. The clerk entered it. The session record would carry the confirmation of the standing down, the Veth Core channel request, and the restraint line. All of it in the permanent record. All of it available to any signatory, any observer, any registry request. The record held everything. Vrethal did not look up. Osivus' gill filaments were still. Not the amber of a session running correctly. Not any They were still the way things are still when they have run out of register and the body has stopped trying to express something it does not have a color for. The accord of reach was on the clerk's desk. No one moved it. The new entry dried on the display. Above it, in the clerk's bracketed notation, the old one. Species H1, Class C emerging, with the clerk's single line drawn through it, horizontal in the standard amendment format, no note, no editorial, one clean line. The way every amendment to the permanent record was marked. The way amendments had been marked for 312 years. The session close chime rang again, the second beat, the one that ended the recording. The accord of reach remained on the clerk's desk. The physical seal faced upward, old amber, intact, the wax unbroken. No one moved it.